I'm going to talk about some of the difficulties, particularly on the basis of some of the work that we've been doing around our concerns about corporate influence on science. Another piece of technology. Around some of our concerns about the way commercial influences can influence and have detrimental effects on science and technology, and looking at where the problems are and how we might deal with them. I think this reiterates some of the things that John said about the organisation that I work with. There are some leaflets and booklets downstairs, including copies of the report that we recently published. We're an organisation of about 1,000 science, design, technology professionals, so we spread right across I'll pronounce the Latin wrongly, so I'll just say science, design and technology. We cover quite a range from social sciences, natural sciences, engineers, architects, and related professions. And our concern is that social and environmental concerns are not given high enough priority within the professions in the way our work is used. So we argue for more changes in there, and we've done a lot of work around vested interests in science and technology, particularly corporate and military influence. So the basic, I'm afraid I don't have such fancy graphics as David had, but you have to make do with some words instead. In terms of the background, business and science now is, and indeed for some considerable time, business has a very substantial influence on science, and for various reasons it's growing through a range of mechanisms, particularly around funding. Business research and development in-house is the biggest sector of research and development. It's about nearly two-thirds in the UK and in most other industrialised countries. There's various funding mechanisms through with academia, business alone, and joint funding with public bodies, research councils, and also a range of funding from teaching and business involvement on committees that make decisions on the way that public funding is used. The Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology has industry representatives on it. Research councils have industry representatives on steering committees and so on. And policy, particularly over the last 20 years in UK, has been pushing for closer links between industry and academia because of the idea that Britain isn't very good at commercialising. It's good at science, but it's not very good at commercialising the science and getting economic benefits from the science. And so there's been this push, particularly over the last 20 years or so, to get the two institutions to work together. And there's been a whole range of policy papers and initiatives, funding initiatives, partnerships to get industry and academia working together, various government white papers, reports from different advisory bodies and reviews. There's over the 90s and then over the last 10 years it's speeded up, and there have been more of these white papers and more of these reviews arguing that we need to integrate the two. We need more funding mechanisms to get universities to spin out their research, to get more investment for industry within universities themselves. And so we end up with this. And even at government level, there have been reorganisations, all these acronyms that you see, and some of you may be familiar with the way we used to have a Department of Trade and Industry, which covered business, and the Department for Education. They were reorganised into BER and DIAS and DCFS, and then they were reorganised last year so that we now have the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills, and it's the first time that universities and science have been under the government department that oversees business. So there's a very clear direction of travel within government policy making and within the universities and science itself. And this kind of reflects some of the things that David was saying around traditional ideals of the universities and the commercialised structure that we're moving towards. Both of these are idealised. No university has ever been quite like that, and no university is quite like the commercialised one on this side. But there's a direction of travel from the more traditional ideas of curiosity-driven, open-ended research to more working with industry and having technology transfer offices in universities and researchers owning patents and funding of training industry, funding particular courses for workers in going to work in those particular businesses. A particular concern around business, and why we have a particular concern around business, is our worry that businesses' legal obligations are about making profit for the shareholders and prioritising that, and social and environmental goals not being given adequate attention. And within that situation, businesses becoming bigger as globalisation has advanced over the past 20 years or so, businesses becoming very powerful. Economically, they are larger than many countries, some of the bigger ones, and have a great deal of political influence. And with the drive, both at a government level and a business level, around economic competitiveness, business interests are getting a lot of priority. And we see now with the recession and economic problems that there's an even greater push. This is the way out of the recession. We must make science and business work closer together to help get us out of the recession. And the dependency of business and particularly industry on science and technology in one form or another for success, for financial success, and how that creates a great deal of influence within the area. And our concern is that we now are in a situation where short-term economic goals have a special priority within science, and too much priority. But that's not to say that we're anti-business and we think, science should not be commercialised. It's very important to understand a role for business and understand a role for commercialisation of science, but to not allow the economic drive to overwhelm the other values and uses of society, of science and technology. And particularly as we face various global environmental problems and huge inequality in the world, bearing these sorts of issues in mind, we think it needs much more emphasis. So I'm going to summarise some of the particular problems. These are just a few of the main ones. We talk in more depth in our reports about these and related issues. It's a concern around undue influence on research studies, the ways in which scientific information can be misleading, and the balance of research priorities, economic versus wider concerns. So sponsorship bias is one of the main sources of concern within individual research studies. And it's basically the idea that a source of funding can influence the outcome of the research study. Now there's a developing area of research which is colloquially known as research on research, which has been investigating this issue. And various academic studies have published it and look particularly at the pharmaceutical industry and also some